At least the poster's laminated, because I saw some posters out there. I appreciate the effort. I saw some protesters out there were holding signs on loose leaf paper. It's like, come on. This guy, he took the time to laminate that thing with whatever that is, and I really appreciate it. Like, he had to go down to Office Space, or he had to go down to Staples with that thing. All right. Anyway. Lia Thomas is a man, back to the subject in hand here. And I'll be using the word he in reference to Lia Thomas and any other man that I might refer to today. And in fact, I want to begin there with some thoughts about language, because this issue is much bigger than sports, and we got to start with the language. The trans agenda has infiltrated our society largely through language. Now, I don't mean that the gender ideologues use language to make compelling arguments. No, not at all. They have no compelling arguments, as we just saw there. They have no arguments to make at all. They don't even have coherent arguments, let alone compelling ones. Rather, they like to manipulate language itself. They make it into their pet. They talk about preferred pronouns, but a pronoun is a grammatical construct. It has to be deployed according to the laws of grammar, not the fickle whims of the individual. Now, if I'm standing, let's say, on this stage, let's just call it a stage for the purpose of the analogy, and you want to communicate to someone else about the fact that I am standing on this stage, you will say to that person, he is standing on the stage. It would be grammatically and factually incorrect to say, she is standing on the stage, as she denotes a human female, which I am not. It also would be incorrect to say that they are standing on the stage, as that indicates more than one person, and I'm just one person. And it would be incorrect to say Z or Zer is standing on the stage, as that suggests that I'm some sort of space alien, which, as far as you know, I'm not. Now, in a similar way, if I am standing on a stage, and let's say that I insist that my preferred preposition is off, it would make no sense for you to respect my preferences and tell everyone that I'm standing off the stage. Now, I may prefer the word off, whatever that means. I may think that I am off. I may identify as someone who stands off of things, not on them. But that doesn't change the objective fact that I am indeed on the stage. Prepositions, nouns, verbs, and pronouns, unless they're used in a fictional story or a poem or something, are meant to convey objective facts about reality. Now, if they're not going to perform that function, then they no longer perform any real function at all, and meaningful, useful words have been reduced to impotent nonsense. But should we just be polite and call people by their preferred pronouns anyway? The answer is no, and here's why. First of all, I think we should establish, just a general note here, that you don't really call somebody a pronoun when you're speaking to them, right? If you want to address a person directly, you usually use their name. And a name can be whatever you want it to be. If a woman says that her name is Fred, or a man says his name is Sally, I will call her Fred and him Sally. Because names are, by definition, personal, subjective, arbitrary. You could change your name if you want. No one can say you can't. Pronouns are objective and also generally more distant in the way that they're used. You're usually called by a pronoun when you're not physically present for the conversation, or at least when you're not the one being addressed in the conversation. So, when someone insists on a preferred pronoun, he's trying to prevent you from using proper grammar even when he's not in the room with you. He's saying to you, whenever you refer to me, even if I'm 10,000 miles away, you must abandon the rules of proper grammar and parrot whatever gibberish I have assigned to you. You must bark like a dog on my command, even when I'm not even here. That's not only absurd, it's also arrogant in the extreme. That's the other thing you find about the proponents of gender ideologies, that they are all, every single one of them, massive narcissists, control-hungry narcissists who think they have the right to control everything about society and everything you say and do. They don't. That's just not how language works. It's not how life works. It's not my job to enforce your self-perception. Okay? You might see yourself as a woman, but that's not how, if you're a man, that's not how I see you. And that's not what you actually are. And so I cannot be required to affirm what I do not believe and what I know to be untrue. And further, it is not my job to adopt your perception of yourself whenever I'm talking about you. What kind of nonsense is this? Now look, I might perceive myself as handsome and intelligent. Many of you are laughing. You don't perceive me that way, and that's fine. What I cannot do is require that everyone who speaks about me must also have the same perception. My self-perception is not a project that I can assign to the entire world. It's my self-perception. It's my business, not anybody else's. Second point, using an incorrect pronoun, incorrect as in a pronoun that does not properly convey objective reality, is not only nonsensical, it's also dishonest. So if I say she drove to the store when I'm talking about a man, then I'm lying. Now, I may be lying with the best intentions, I may be lying because I'm trying not to hurt anybody's feelings, but a lie is a lie. I am conveying an untruth. And it is bad to convey untruths because the person I'm speaking to, whoever it is, deserves to know the truth. Now, if I didn't think they deserved to know the truth, then I shouldn't be saying anything to them at all. And the person I'm referring to also deserves to know the truth, which is why if I'm talking to someone directly, I'm not going to respect their preferred pronouns. I will call them what they are to their face. Because a confused and deluded person needs the truth. He doesn't need us to participate in and encourage his delusion. Now, that may be what he wants, but it's not what he needs. And it won't help him in the long run. And at any rate, he doesn't have the right to control my speech or compel me to lie on his behalf. But then we get to this question of, well, doesn't grammar and language evolve over time? Well, it does. However, language evolves according to coherent rules and standards. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people making up their own rules individually, which isn't evolution, but degradation, fracturing, collapse. See, language is a symbol. It's a sound meant to represent something. We say elephant to talk about elephants and camels to talk about camels, but things could have worked out so that we say camels to talk about the animals that we know as elephants and vice versa. There's no reason why we had to use those particular sounds to represent those animals. It just worked out that way. And so language can shift and change over time, but most changes in language happen relatively organically. Due to a wide combination of influences, people begin to slightly adjust the verbal symbols they use for certain things. And eventually the official grammatical rules change, to reflect that. They change descriptively, not proscriptively. Now, what's happening with pronouns and with all the language around gender is not like this. This is a top-down change. The grammar rules are being changed proscriptively. Our cultural elites have decided, for ideological reasons, that we ought to be using different words. And they plan to berate and scold and punish us until we comply. That's not a natural evolution of language. That's an intentional manipulation of language, which is a very different thing. Just look at what they're doing with the made-up nonsensical word Latinx or Latinx. I say Latinx. I think Latinx is how it's pronounced. Now, almost nobody in the Hispanic community uses that word or likes it. They've done studies on this in many polls. Very few like that word. Yet the elites keep using it and pushing it, hoping that eventually people will submit and start adopting it in daily use. And if and when that day happens, they'll then turn around and say, look at that, language evolved. No, calling that natural evolution, it's like injecting drugs into a lab rat. And then it grows a third ear and you say, it evolved. This is something that you did. Now, there have been other examples of this kind of unnatural, imposed evolution of language. African American became the preferred term in the 90s to supplant black, and then went back to black again, then it was replaced by people of color, which is considered politically correct, while colored people is horrifically racist. Now, all of this is pretty arbitrary and kind of ludicrous, and mostly the result of elites telling us what words we should be using, but that's not nearly as bad as the pronoun change. Because in the former case, the verbal symbols to describe a certain reality are being changed, okay. But with pronouns, they wish to change the symbols and the thing that is being symbolized. The point of making pronouns fluid is to give the impression that people are fluid. They're not just trying to change the way we describe things. They also want to change that which is being described. They don't simply want you to use different words to describe certain men. They want you to see those men differently, as in fact the opposite of what they actually are. They want you to think that they are not men at all. Now, that all may have seemed like a long digression about grammar when really we're supposed to be talking about sports, but actually it's not a digression because we're not really here to talk about sports. We're here rather to talk about the truth. And that's what's under assault. Not simply women's sports, but truth itself. Now, women's sports is just one battleground in the war for truth. That's why I care about it. I freely admit that I am not exactly an ardent fan of women's college swimming. In fact, I can only name one women's college swimmer, and he's not even a woman. So, but I am a fan of the truth and of justice and common sense. And all of these things are under assault when men are allowed to intrude sports. That's why it matters. Now, I've said that Thomas is not a woman, and I've established why I will not refer to him as such. But how do I know that he's not a woman? Well, because the word woman, just like the word man, has a definition. A woman, by definition, is an adult human female. That is the literal definition of the word. A man, by definition, is an adult human male. Now, those are the only two options available for a human species. That's all you got. You have no other options. There is no third sex. It doesn't exist. All humans who have ever lived on Earth have been either male or female, every single one. We call this a binary system. There are no non-binary people. And that's why if you want to go to Amazon and order a shirt with the non-binary pride flag, it will come in either men's or women's sizes. Now, what is a female? That's the next question. A woman is adult human female. Well, what's a female? Okay, glad you asked. What is a female? Well, a female is someone with XX chromosomes, a female reproductive system, female gametes or eggs, the ability in principle to ovulate and bear offspring. There are females who suffer from illnesses, mutations, injuries, deformities, maybe are simply postmenopausal, and so therefore are prevented from performing some of these natural female functions. That doesn't make them any less female. It is instead an exception that proves the rule. Here's why. When a female cannot bear children, we know that something is physically wrong. Something's gone wrong here. If she's of childbearing age and she can't bear children, something is wrong. Something's not working right. Maybe it can be fixed, maybe it can't. But we know that because we know that women are supposed to be able to bear children. But when a man cannot bear children, we know that that is not a sign that anything has gone wrong, because men are not supposed to bear children, and no man in history ever has or ever will. Now, if as a woman you go to the doctor and tell him that you're unable to conceive children in your womb, he'll run some tests to figure out what's wrong with your body. If as a man you go to the doctor and tell him that you're unable to conceive children in your womb, he should run tests to figure out what's wrong with your brain. But as it happens, the joke doesn't really work because our society has lost its entire mind, which means that he might actually give you hormone pills to help you transition into a woman. But you'll note that, and much to the disappointment of some of the men who have unfortunately undergone this procedure without realizing, even after becoming a woman, still the man will not be able to ovulate, will not be able to conceive children, will not be able to perform any of the exclusively female functions, ever, because he is not a female and will never, ever be one. Thomas is not a female and will never be one. He's a man, a male, with XY chromosomes of male anatomy, as the women who've seen him in the locker room have attested, male gametes. But there's a lot more to being a male than just that. I mean, indeed, the physical differences between men and women are not confined to the reproductive system. They can be found in every bodily system, in every part of the body. You know, Lia Thomas, like any male, is male down to his bones, down to his cells, down to his DNA. When he dies and is buried beneath a giant monument celebrating him as history's greatest female athlete, 100 years from now, he could be excavated and his bones analyzed, and scientists will be very confused to discover that the greatest female athlete was a dude. His bones will attest to the biological reality. They will not declare his pronouns, his bones. They won't affirm his self-perception, because there will be no self. The self will be gone, but the man will remain. Think about that. When you die, one of the very last things to remain of you is your sex, even after almost everything else is gone. That's how fundamental it is. Now, many of these biological differences happen to give him a distinct advantage over women in sports, especially swimming. When he gets in the pool this week here at Georgia Tech, he'll be swimming against people with 20% less muscle mass on average, 40% less upper body strength, 33% less lower body strength, smaller fast twitch muscle fibers, smaller lungs, smaller hearts, shorter legs, more estrogen, less testosterone, a lower capacity to produce oxygen when they exert themselves. Courageously, Thomas has chosen to race against people who have literally dozens of immutable biological disadvantages in comparison to himself. What a hero. Now, these advantages are why the fastest man in the world is always faster than the fastest woman. Does that mean that every man in the world is faster than every woman? Of course not. But the fastest man in the world is always faster than the fastest woman. And you know what? If the fastest man dies, the next fastest will still be faster than the fastest woman. In fact, if the 100 fastest men all got on a plane to go to a fastest man retreat, and then on the way, tragically, the plane crashed and they all died, the 101st fastest man, who is now the fastest man by inheritance, is still faster by a lot than the fastest woman. And then the next 100 fastest men, they could also go to the same retreat, stupidly, and die also. And the next batch of 100 are still faster than the fastest woman. We could do the same thing with strongest man versus strongest woman. We won't go through the whole thing again. Now, the Olympics attest to this. There has never been a time, ever in history, not once, when the women's racing or swimming champions were faster on average than the men. It has never happened in history, and never will. These advantages are why, there's in fact a whole website, maybe you've seen this, dedicated to comparing high school boys track and field champions against female Olympians. The high school boys outperform the female Olympians in almost every category, by huge margins. Taking one example, the New Balance Nationals outdoor meet is one of the preeminent high school track meets in the country. If the 2016 high school boys finalists in the 100-meter race were to have raced against the 2016 female Olympic finalists, the fastest woman would have come in 9th place against high school boys. 9th. Gold, silver, and bronze all go to the boys. Places 4 through 8 all go to the boys against female Olympians. Now this holds true in almost every event, and it's not just track, and it's not just hypothetical. Some of this has actually been tested. Back in 2017, a team of 15-year-old boys scrimmaged against the U.S. women's national soccer team and beat them 5-2, which is just great, first of all. Male and female athletes are so different, separated by such a vast biological chasm, that you can actually count the total number of dunks made by the WNBA players in the history of the league. Like this is counted, because it's only happened 28 times, and 23 of them were by the same player. Now, for comparison's sake, there's a player in the NBA who dunked the ball 300 times by himself in one season. That's one player in 1 year dunking it almost 10 times more than the entire WNBA over the course of a quarter century. Men and women are different, very different. There's no denying it. Men are stronger, they are faster. They are better at almost every competitive sport. Literally every line of evidence supports this. All of the evidence, all of it, supports the claim that men in general have biological advantages over women in sports. There is no evidence to the contrary. None. Which is why you'll notice that the people on that side never produce any evidence. They don't have it. It doesn't exist. They can't defend their position. They can't even really explain their position because they run into a basic logical problem, which I've talked about quite a bit, and I'll talk about it again here. So for example, they say that Lia Thomas is a woman, right? But they can't tell you what they mean when they say that. What is a woman? Now, gender theory has made it so that the word woman itself and the word man have no meaning. Leftists, because of their ideological commitments, cannot define the terms. They say trans women are women. They say that someone can start out life as a woman and transition, or as a male and transition into a woman. But how can I understand any of these claims and these declarations if I don't know what they mean by the word? And how can they make any meaningful statements about womanhood if they themselves don't know what they mean by the word? So I ask very simply, as I've been asking for years, as I asked on Dr. Phil, what is a woman? Now, they say that biology has nothing to do with womanhood. Okay. Well, what does have something to do with womanhood? If we can't define a woman physically, how can we define her? What is a woman? What does it mean? Now, if you're on the left, what exactly are you trying to say? When you say that such and such biological man is a woman, what are you trying to convey about that person? What do you mean? You say Lia Thomas is a woman. Okay, well, he's a what? What does that mean exactly? It's a fair question, isn't it? Now, I've been told by the few that attempted to give an answer that a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. But that definition doesn't work because you can't use the word you're defining in the definition. If I ask you for the definition of an apple, and you say an apple is that which is an apple, well, you haven't really told me anything about apples. I still don't know what an apple is. Same goes for a woman. Now, you might say that a woman is an adult human female or anybody who identifies as an adult human female. But that's just another way of saying that a woman is an adult human female or not an adult human female. And that's just another way of saying that a woman is nothing in particular. Woman has no definition, if that's the definition. Also, the person offering that definition is themselves drawing a distinction between a person who is a thing and a person who identifies as a thing. I mean, the very phrase, trans women are women, seems to admit that trans women are not really women. Because if they're women, then why are you calling them trans? What does the trans part denote? See, the trans part seems to be pointing to some kind of elemental, crucial difference between these two categories. And I would say that that crucial difference is what makes them separate categories. When it comes down to it, if the word woman means nothing, it's nonsensical to identify as one, given that you're identifying as something that's not really anything. Now, is a woman in the end just anybody who enjoys feminine things or dresses in a feminine way? You hear these insane abusive parents who say, you know, my 4-year-old boy really liked The Little Mermaid, and that's when we first realized he's a girl. Well, see, femininity, though, cannot be the defining quality of being a woman, because we can't define feminine until we've defined woman, as the definition of feminine is having qualities or an appearance traditionally associated with women. Besides, the left has been trying to break down the societal constructs of feminine versus masculine for years. How can you go from saying, as I heard all when I was growing up, going back again decades, it used to be, well, not all women should be expected to be feminine. And now what, the only defining characteristic of a woman is femininity? For years and years and years, they said, in fact, that if a boy plays with a Little Mermaid or plays with dolls, that there's nothing wrong with that. It's not girly. And now they're saying that if a boy plays with dolls, he actually is a girl. Talk about reinforcing the gender binary. They can't answer these questions. They insist that our conception of womanhood is wrong, and then we ask them what the right conception is, and they shrug their shoulders. We don't know what a woman is, they say, but whatever a woman is, you know, Lia Thomas is that. That's nonsense. And we all know that it's nonsense. Even most of them know. The people marching around outside with the signs. Almost all of them know that this doesn't make any sense. And yet we're supposed to cooperate with it anyway. We're supposed to abandon all at once the fundamental truths that all of us know and have always known, and we're supposed to do it for no other reason than it will hurt people's feelings if we don't. It'll hurt Lia Thomas's feelings. Of course, his feelings are the only feelings that matter, right, when it comes to the swimming issue. His feelings and the feelings of other trans people, I mean, those feelings, for some reason, are supposed to outweigh the feelings of women who don't want their sports destroyed and their privacy invaded and their very identities appropriated and stolen and cheapened and fetishized and turned into a Halloween costume. The feelings of 1 million women are dust when stacked up against the feelings of one gender-confused man. All of reality is dust. Biology, science, truth, all of it is supposed to be thrown out the window because of one trans person's feelings. Well, I say to that, no. That's what I say. And I urge everyone in this room to say no to this. Don't affirm what you know are lies, Everyone knows it's a lie. Don't cooperate with what you know is wrong. Don't abandon what you know is true. Don't pretend to believe what you don't believe. So it takes a lot of courage in this world, I think, to say no. It's a word that's not said nearly enough. A guy like Lia Thomas has never heard it in his life, ever. No one's ever told him no. No one's ever sat him down and said, dude, no, this is not happening. But he needs to hear it now. All the gender ideologues need to hear it now. All of the liars and frauds trying to push and coerce and shame us into surrendering our common sense. All the cry bullies using emotional blackmail because they have no arguments. Everyone demanding that we pretend to believe what we don't believe. All of them everywhere need to hear it. No. And that's it for me. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We are going to go ahead and transition into the Q&A section. All right, our first question. Why isn't the women's rights movement furious about this?
Well, I think there's a real, who am I talking to? I guess I'm just talking to all you guys. There's a real fracturing in the women's rights movement right now, I think. You know, there are some feminists. I don't give feminists a lot of credit for many things, but there are at least some feminists who have noticed, I think probably a little bit too late, but they've noticed that the trans agenda is undermining everything that they have said and fought for decades. And so I think that there's a real fracturing happening right now. But for the most part, the reason why most women's rights activists don't stand up to this is because they're beholden ultimately to the left. You know, what we call women's rights is not really about women's rights. It never really was. I mean, when these are people who are fighting for the right to kill babies, that's not women's rights. It's got nothing to do with rights at all, actually. So they're beholden to the left, and in the left there is a victim sort of hierarchy, and there's some jostling that goes on in the victim hierarchy. Who's the uber victim, the top victim, whose victim claims always override everybody else. And right now, LGBT are at the top, and trans is at the top of the LGBT, at the very top of the pyramid. So I think that's why they're not stopping it.
Why should trans women be unable to participate in sports due to testosterone levels when cis women can sometimes have comparable levels?
Okay. Well, first of all, as established, the difference between a quote-unquote trans woman, otherwise known as a biological male, and a quote-unquote cis woman, and that word doesn't mean anything, by the way. I think cis, by the way, that was like invented by someone on a message board. Seriously, a decade ago or something. And now it's used in academia. But anyway, the differences go way beyond hormones. So this is kind of a red herring, this focus on hormones. I listed some of the many differences between men and women biologically and physically. Really hundreds of biological differences. Hormones is just one of them. Also, another point, no one is saying that quote-unquote trans women are not allowed to compete in sports. No one is trying to prevent trans people from competing in sports. Nobody is trying to prevent trans people from using the bathroom. No one's doing that. All we are saying is that the rules for quote trans people should be exactly the same as they are for everybody else. You're not special. So I can compete against men in sports and I can use the men's bathroom because I'm a biological male. And all we're saying is that if you are a trans person, you have to obey the same rule as me. So under the guise of wanting equality as usual, what they're actually asking for is special treatment. They want a special rule, special exception made just for them. And that is, it's bullshit, frankly. Pardon the French.
All right, next question. Why should we even bother having gendered sports teams when it would be more fair to have competition based on levels similar to wrestling weight classes, but based on whatever the relevant metric is for each sport?
Well, if you start breaking up sports that way, then it's just going to end up, you're going to end up back where you started, and eventually it's going to be, effectively it's going to be men and women again, because men outcompete the women so much to begin with. But also, why should we have to make, of course, if you do that and you just get rid of the distinctions, What will actually happen in the end, obviously, is that there will be no more women's sports. There'll be no more women competing because they'll get out-competed. They're not going to be able to make any team if the men are invited in all these same teams. If you collapse, for example, the WNBA and the NBA, what the hell are the WNBA players going to do? They're going to, they can, I guess, run out the Gatorade and stuff like that, but they're not going to be able. Well, it's true. It's true. There is no WNBA player who could make it on an NBA roster. Not even close, okay? I would have a better chance of making an NBA roster than a WNBA player. So that's what would happen, is women would be cut out of sports completely. And my answer to that is, why should we have to do this? Why are we talking about drastically reordering the way that we approach sports and society? Because a small sliver of people are uncomfortable with the way that we've been doing it forever. Instead of having to restructure everything for these people, why can't we say to them, I'm sorry this makes you uncomfortable. It's just the way it is. Deal with it. Why is that not, in effect, an acceptable solution? You're a man, you're uncomfortable using the men's restroom. Deal with it. I don't know what to tell you. Just deal with it. Why is that? Why can't we just say that? Is my question. Okay.
If trans women have such an advantage over cis women, then why is it that very few trans women in competition are out there dominating the field? In fact, with Lia Thomas in particular, why isn't she #1 in every event she competes in? Okay,
well, again, no one is saying that every man is better at every sport than every woman. That's not the point. We're talking in general here. And I went through in the speech, of whoever wrote the question, if you were listening to the speech, I went through proving that men in general outcompete women in general in almost every competitive sport, and it's not even close. So the claim is not that any old man can walk into, swim meet, a track meet, and just beat every woman that's there. No one is saying that. But he is going to have an enormous advantage. So what you actually have to do to kind of see this is you look at the man who's competing against women. How is he performing against the women? Now compare that to how he performed against the men. And that's where you're going to see the advantage. Doesn't mean he's always going to beat the women, but he's going to do a lot better against the women than he did against the man. Really good example of this was up in Connecticut. There were two men who, boys rather, high school track, and they were racing against boys for a couple of years, and then they decided, oh, I'm a woman, and they started racing against the girls. And they didn't win every single track meet, but they won a lot of them. And when you compare their times, they would go against the women easily top 3. Against the boys, they wouldn't even make it on the track. You're going from whatever 50th rank to 3rd. That's where the advantage is.
All right, last question. As a mom of a young athlete, what can I do to protect women in sports?
Well, so this is one of those answers. It's kind of a easy for me to say category. But I'm more than happy to come here and talk about this and explain why all this is wrong. But what I'm saying only goes so far. It's only going to have so much impact, which is not that much impact at all, frankly. I still have to say it because it needs to be said. But the real impact is when the girls who are being subjected to this and their parents stand up and say, we are not going to take part in this. And so you want this to go away on Wednesday, Thursday, when all this is happening? The women who are supposed to compete against Lia Thomas, what they need to say is, I'm not going to do it. Okay? The alarm, the buzzer sounds, off to the races, just sit there in the pool and let him race by himself. And I guarantee you, it would only take women doing this for a few weeks, and this problem is done. It's gone. So that's what. Yeah. Again, easy for me to say I'm not the one there doing it, but that is in fact the solution. And we'll leave it there. Thanks. I'm just noticing now, I was canceled on one of these signs here. Well, how did this guy, he was allowed in here, why did he get thrown out with the other guy?
I want you to sign for me.
Okay, all right, well, that's fine then. Okay, thanks a lot, guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Little button on the bottom.